Our next speaker will be Rick Tumlinson, the president of the Space Frontier Foundation, speaking on MIRCORP and the commercialization of MIR.
Well, I'm going to be wearing a lot of hats, so I literally bought a couple of hats.
Oh, just one thing.
Yes.
We are running about 30 minutes behind. We'll shift the whole afternoon schedule, shorten the break a little bit.
So if y'all want to go see Bob Zerman, we can all just adjourn it over there. Okay, never mind. I wish I had a spy over there. I want to see if he's going to admit that I gave him his first $100,000. I don't think he will, because then he asks me to leave the organization. Anyway, this is only a model, but folks, we have the lease to the real one. And the world changes. What can I say? In fact, I will. Literally, MIRCORP. Yeah. Okay, there, that's better. What can I tell you? The project, the MIRCORP project began a long time ago. 1991, a couple of things happened. The wall came down, basically. Ralph Hall, who was then head of the House Space Committee, spoke at our conference, this foundation's second conference in Houston. I don't know how that we got into it. Probably due to they held a fundraiser upstairs 2 hours later, so we had to show up. But he got out there and he said, look, you know, it's time we should start working with the Russians. They build good hardware, etc. About that same time, I wrote an article in the LA Times talking about the cosmonaut who went up to Soviet, came out of Russia and said, you know, we should look at their hardware. They do good stuff. Well, what we really meant, what I meant at least, and the foundation meant, was we should go have Boeing cut a contract with Energia, the company. And what happened was that got misinterpreted, and Dan Goldman ran over there, Mr. Bureaucrat, and they created the Russian Space Agency, so the bureaucrats could deal with bureaucrats. And that's sort of what led to the fiasco we call ISS right now. Feel free to ask me about building and sensing better to give you this talk. Then, you know, we kind of worked the idea. We were, at one point, we were in opposition to the International Space Station. Had some people talk to me at different points. And, you know, we decided to drop our attacks on station in support of what we call cheap access to space. We literally sent a message into Dan Gold and said, hey, we'll drop our attacks on station if you'll support a little thing called DCX. We were told he's going to do it. We dropped our attacks that day. We didn't attack space station anymore. During the interim, it allowed our heads to clear and think about things a little bit. Realized, yeah, we did need to get some markets going in space. And so came up with the idea of Alpha Town. Alpha Town is the idea that it is a community of activities that would create an economy anyway. It's not a single point solution, and I have to say this. Jerry O'Neill was wrong, Tsiolkovsky was wrong, Diane Anderson is wrong, Zubin is wrong, they're all wrong. Okay? It's not one thing. It's the interaction of all kinds of things. Look out the door. All right? We are not a monolithic society that exists to make, you know, peanut butter. It's the interaction of all kinds of activities, governmental, private sector, all kinds of things working together. Tsiolkovsky is the only one that has used, by the way. He grew up in a very close Soviet system. None of the rest of us do, even my former boss, Jerry. But I think Jerry was heading in the right direction. It's not a one-hit thing. It's not a one major thing, and all of a sudden it all happens. It's the interaction. Therefore, we came up with the idea of Alpha Town. And the Alpha Town concept was based on the fact that there is a role for government on the frontier and the private sector, but that we've been looking at them the wrong way. Apollo was never going to get us to the space station in 2001. All right, Apollo doesn't get you to Hilton or Pan Am. I'm glad they're back, just in time for 2001. And you know, so we have these kind of misunderstandings going on that were making us all crazy, and it helped to clear the air and start looking at how we work together. So we came up with the Alpha Town idea. Well, you know, that's great, but we only have the one facility out there. As many of you know, the space field is littered with the bodies of those who have tried to work with our student government agency. Time and time again, great ideas have been crushed. Joe Allen's industrial space facility, external tanks, etc., on and on and on. Idea after idea after idea. You know, the Space Frontier Foundation is very interesting. We get people coming into the field, and they are starry-eyed. They've got money, they got dreams, they got ideas, they got businesses, and they're going to go into space. And we tell them the hard reality, and they look, man, you guys are so negative. And then we let them go off. and it's inevitable. A year later, they come back to us after they've tried to do it with NASA for a couple of weeks. And they're like, oh man, I don't know what happened. We thought this was NASA, you know? They are lost. The Trans-Hab fiasco that just happened is one case in point. There's several companies that went in to try and build Trans-Hab. Difficulty was Johnson Space Center had their own people that want to build it. Deck was stacked. Okay? This is what you're dealing with. This is what led us to go deal with the folks overseas. Now, at the same time, one building does not a community make, whether it's ISS, MIR, whatever. Number two, everybody was bidding the value of MIR down. It was going down, down, down. Do you notice that the terms that were hung on it? I mean, God, if you could do this to your opposing candidate in a political campaign, you would win hands down. The failing MIR, the aging MIR, the decrepit MIR, the dying MIR, the rotting MIR, the old MIR, the antique MIR. Every story, value dropping down, 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 down. Fire sale prices. Still like to use that word talking about space, but that's where it was going. Now, we looked at it and we said, okay, but you know, it's made of metal. It costs $10,000 a pound to carry anything up there. If you could carry a loaf of bread into space, go Shazam, turn it into gold, it wouldn't pay. So, I mean, it has value. Just the plain old metal has value. Gaskets can be replaced. You're sitting on an island in the Caribbean. You have a grand hotel that's falling apart, completely falling apart. They're building a government base and hotel on the other side of the island. They're pouring tons of money into it. You hear the fleets are coming. All right, the Princess fleets and all this stuff. They're all going to be coming. Oh, by the way, the staff of the hotel, before it fell into disrepair, lives next door. And they were an excellent, world-class staff. And they're ready to work again. Now, what do? You tear it down, or do you put in new wiring, new plumbing, you know, refurbish it, and use the name and the location. Okay, think in terrestrial terms. Space ain't special. Space is like anywhere else when it comes to business. Absolutely. Okay, so what did we do? We took that attitude. Okay, the cruise ships are a little slow. They haven't quite shown up yet. We're dealing with that on the Hill in other ways. ISS and ourselves and others are trying to cut that path. Ron Jones, and you're welcome to the 60,000 we gave you. Others are out there fighting for it. There's a lot of good work going on. A lot of good companies, and we wish them well. We should definitely do the best you can to support them. But in the meantime, there was a facility. It worked. It held volume. It held air. Sort of. Okay. They bid the price down. Well, for everybody else, oh God, it's coming down. For a businessman, it's called a buyer's market. We had been thinking about it for a long time. How do you do it? Everybody else was looking at how you raise $150 million, which was the stated cost of keeping MIR in orbit. We took another approach. We said, how do you lower the cost of keeping it in orbit? A couple of years earlier, we had Ivan Becky come down and talk to us about tethers. In fact, the first time I ever heard of tethers was this esteemed gentleman himself, Mr. Bob Ford, many years ago at an L5 conference that he served. Planted the seed. Followed up with Arthur C. Clarke's Fountain of Paradise, which is a more of a mechanical tether. And they started to mature. You know, ideas sometimes seem to come together when the time is right. You carry them a long time, and then the pieces all start to fit together. And that's what happened in this case. One of our members, a fellow former L5er and SSer, David Anneman, brilliant guy, comes up with an idea about every 5 minutes. You have to shut him up almost all the time. But every once in a while, he throws a good one in there. And actually, they're all good ideas in season. He came to us and said, hey, you know, what about tether MIR? You know, let's look at it. The foundation about that time began a webpage called Keep MIR Alive. Basically, the idea was just to, again, what we like to do is we fight the battle of ideas. Go to the top of the hill, wave the flag, say, if you believe in this, gather around. And then we get enough people, and we either go to dinner or we charge. One or the other. All right, so we got this Keep MIR Alive campaign going. At that point, let me see, going down the timeline. We began to look at the tether in December 1998. I should say, 1997 we created Fines, $5 million investment. We're now at $25 million. We're funding all kinds of research all over the place, throwing money out there, having a good time. Looking at leading edge types of things, activities that are very pivotal. We like to come in at a crux moment and see what we can do with just a little bit of money. Kind of very much going with the SSI philosophy. Greg Marinak used to go around and give speeches for SSI saying, you know, we're so cheap. What we do is we find the world's best researchers, give them just enough money to pay somebody else to mow the yard. and then get them to work on what they want to do. Those are the kind of things we do with funds. And you look at our agenda, it's very much everyone's agenda except for the master items, which is a bit different idea entirely. So what we did was we took $10,000 and I flew Vladimir Siametnikov from the Energia company over, put him with Joe Carroll, who's the godfather of solo when it comes to flying active tethers. Wonderful fellow. Locked him away for a week in LA, in San Diego, slipped pizzas under the door, and they slipped a report out. The report basically said a tether could be useful in stabilizing MIR. Based on that, and in parallel to that, I was having discussions with a guy that had some money. And we were having all kinds of fun, just coming up with all kinds of ideas that you could do if you had your own space station. At that time, it was pie in the skies, the kind of conversations we all have after these conferences. 1 o'clock this morning, you're going to be up in some suite having the same conversations we did. And we began to try and put the pieces together to make this thing work. And so we kept trashing the thing, kept unofficially demanding. They still say they don't officially want it down, only if it interferes with their program. But they've done some really tricky things that, the very vehicles are going away. I'll just get really frustrated. Anyway, the point is we moved along, and frankly, let me see, about January '99, had a conversation with Mr. Anderson, who's an independently wealthy gentleman, and we were doing sushi and sake, and had a nice conversation. Now you have to understand, a lot of best deals in history have been made over a drink. It doesn't mean that these people are drunk when they make the decision. Okay? It's very important to understand. Okay, some of the people characterize this thing as like, oh, we were just a bunch of drunk people out there. No, I mean, a guy doesn't get to $1 billion by making decisions while drunk. Okay? But sometimes conversations happen when we're having dinner. I asked him, I said, do you want a space station? He said, yes. I said, okay, well, I think we might be able to have a shot. At that point, we began to look at putting a couple $100,000 into a more detailed study, and we did. We hired Energia again, and offered a couple $100,000 to tell us whether a tether would work. In August of '99, I think it is, they came back and they said yes, the tether would work. There's a list of Russian names there, so just lay it up there. It's going to be a decipherable. You'd be lucky if we get it right. And you're a genius. These are the heads of the design bureaus. These are very powerful people in the Russian space industry. And they all signed off on it. This is their signatures, where they all said a tether will work. Everybody. I mean, the guy in charge of Janet is an emergency. A tether will work. The physicists, the scientists, the ground controllers have this very interesting picture of MIR on their wall, with puppet strings coming down. You may have heard about that in Dragonfly. Weird little book. So anyway, they all agreed that it would work. We took the study, and at that point, things began to get very serious. We knew we had only a few months. This thing was going to come down. At our conference that fall of '99, we had Servetnikov there and Boris, I can't remember his name, Gromov, not Gromov, the head of the ground controllers was there, and we talked to them a little bit more about the idea. The day after the conference, I climbed on a plane and flew to Moscow. You're the first people ever to see this guy. This is the first protocol that led to the takeover of the station. Now, I want to make it very clear, the Russians don't exactly understand American systems. They don't understand, they're not real clear, they weren't real clear at the time on not-for-profit, they weren't real clear on corporations, etc. So this is all thrown in here. This is a non-legal document, non-binding document, but it was a roadmap. And we sat there in the room for 3 days, drinking delightfully strong Russian tea, eating beautifully flavored salmon, and writing this thing up. As you can see, we agreed that within the next 30 days, we were going to go out and figure out a way to the in space, to finance it, create a company, etc. Oh, and it agrees, we're talking about the tether. The MIR electrodynamic tether system is what it's called. Golden Appel, by the way, is the holding company Mr. Anderson and his associates keep their funds in. It's an international holding company. We all went in and began to work on these different things. The Russians went out on their side, we went out on ours. At the end of the day, I thought I was going to be talking to Alexander Direction, who's like the number 2 negotiator over there. They came back in at the end of the first day and said, you're going to be bumped up and talk to Dr. Semenoff, who's the Grand Wazoo, the man in charge of America. What a man he is. As you see there for Energia Limited, there's a guy named Jeffrey Manberg right there, working for Energia at this point. Later on, Jeff was invited, I don't know what you call him, but he's now the head of MIRCORP. I don't know if he's going to tell me this. Can I have the next page? I thought this is also casual. I feel I'm home with the L5 and SS people. I'm just going to talk to you. We also did try to, by the way, lest they tell you fibs in the news, NASA knew about this in January 99. I personally, in George Abbey's office, a copy of the letters going back and forth to the Russians telling them we were doing this. I personally met with the head of commercialization for the space station and told them we were doing this. We were not secretive. We told them it was coming. They didn't believe we could do it. Anyway, now what's interesting is we got down at the end of the negotiations on this first round, got in there, sat down at the table, at the big table in Energia where they had decided, to send the first missions into space. It's a very famous room, probably cameras running in the background. And Dr. Semenoff sitting on the other side with all of his guys, and we're sitting over there before us. And first we got chewed out about Serbia. I was the senior American in the room, so I had a 10-minute lecture on Serbia. And sometimes we disagree about that one too, so it was very interesting. You have to understand the timing of what we were doing. We picked the absolute worst time to cut a deal with the Russians you could ever have picked. It was Serbia. There was all kinds of stuff going on back and forth between the countries. The tech transfer stuff was starting to happen. What I call the space McCarthyism of tech transfer, ITAR, etc. We'll get to that in a minute. It was a very, very, very bad time to be talking to the Russians. But we were different from anybody they'd ever talked to. I don't want to call us New Age. I don't want to call us anything like that. But we were different. We weren't aerospace. We weren't there to take advantage. We weren't there like Dan Golden was the first time we glowed over them because we'd won the Cold War. Dan, little known story. And this will explain the relationship to the Russians that you're hearing about in the news, okay? That Dan Golden is complaining about so much. Dan Golden's first meeting with Semenoff, he was kicked out of his office. He insulted them so badly about the Cold War. Literally told to leave. And could you imagine what kind of business relationship you would have if your two CEOs started with that relationship? Okay? There's a lot you've got to read into. Don't take the news stories blindly. Research, research, research. Talk to the people involved. Find out the truth. Because NASA and Sensenbrenner are lying. Repeatedly, often, and loudly. It's called CYA, folks. And CY, within a few months, is more truth starts to come. Now, subtle, aren't I? Anyway, we're sitting at the table with Dr. Semenoff. It was barely reformed Soviet, but doesn't understand the value of money, which is better than many of our own bureaucrats. And we're sitting there about to cut the deal, and we're saying, well, we've got October 21st to the 27th. He looks at this thing, he's talking to us, he says, I've been on the phone through translators, so it doesn't have an accent, obviously, but, basically, I've been on the phone last night 5 hours with Koptiev. We were arguing the whole time. Jeez. He wants me to bring it down. NASA wants bring it down. Slamming the table. I must bring it down. I must make a decision. We have many Americans come here. Many people come across my table. Oh, they want to do this, but when I say give me the money, they don't give us the money. So I leaned forward because we've been funding the solar cell project and other projects with them. I said, sir, I've given you the money. I've given you the money 4 times so far. It was an interesting moment. Got part of my videotape too. Then I got the lecture on Serbia. Then we began to talk further. He was telling us, this is not going to happen. The conversation had literally shifted to the point where Gus Garlini and I, representing FINE, Gus is an ISU guy, an old ISU guy that worked with DC Anderson. Exactly opposite from me. That's why we work well together. anal retentive, worries about the numbers, always on time, which was great when we started to fly to Russia and we showed up on time. I was late, they gave me first class, but anyway. We're sitting there and we're looking at each other and like, okay, what are we going to tell these guys? This is not going to happen. And we said, okay, well, we want to work with these guys. They got all kinds of assets, all kinds of ideas. So we were literally having the conversation with the Russians at this point that, okay, so this isn't going to work. We really want to cooperate with you on perhaps a lunar mission or something else. This doesn't look like it's going to happen. We were literally moving to the next conversation to have with them. He's telling us, yeah, I can't do this. This thing is falling down. I have to leave this meeting and make a call right now to the Kremlin to control systems, to tell them whether or not, they call it the soup. I've got to call the soup and I've got to tell them whether or not to fly a thruster right now that's either going to take it up or start bringing it down. You know, no pressure. And again, yet, we're just going down. Very good arguments, very valid arguments as to why he couldn't do this, why this was a terrible idea, how many times they've been screwed over, things like that. And then he sits there and he's sitting there, he turns to his guys like this. Just a big argument going on over here. They're all huddling, they're all coming, scooting their chairs up, and they're all talking to him. We're sitting over there with this and he all of a sudden, he spins, he's sitting there like this, he spins around, he slides the paper across. He signs it. He makes one change. He knocks 7 days off our time. That's the only change he made right there. Slides it across the thing, reaches across, grabs my hand, shakes it, deal's done. Protocol signed, we're going ahead. Scared though, living, whatever. Because now it wasn't just an idea. Now we had to raise the money. Now we had to go through the political swamps. Now we had to make it happen. Believe me, the world changed that moment, right here. Not just literally, but personally. So we left, we came back to the States. We had 2 or 3 weeks to put this together. We hired law firms, we began working the ITAR problem. The ITAR problem is a situation wherein our country is probably doing the worst damage to its own space program ever in history. Okay? I just gave a speech in Strasbourg about 4 days ago. I'm still in jet lag, which is why I'm having so much fun right now. And my point was, and I got a couple of interesting sounds when I said this, the worst obstacle to the opening of the frontier right now is the United States government. Unfortunately, this is the truth. Okay? I have the scars, folks. There are other people in this room who have the scars. Let me show you. Why is that so? Aside from NASA's, we own space. You know, space is a company town. They work. NASA's actually telling people if they work with MIRCORP, they will never get a NASA contract. Okay, those kind of things are being said out there. That's the kind of stuff going on. ITAR, though. ITAR has nothing to do with NASA. ITAR is the tech transfer issue. What happened basically is the Republicans found out that some Democratic donors worked with, I forget who's Loral, and they went after them. And the Republicans found out that some Democratic donors worked for Hughes, and they went after them. Help me, Dennis. Is that about right?
Barney Schwartz and Democrats, Loral, and Hughes and Republicans.
Good. Foundation. And they were going after each other, and so they created this morass of laws that is basically shutting down American space involvement. Okay, over in Europe, the discussion was how to create space projects without the United States involved. All these Europeans are talking to each other about that. We are not a trustworthy partner for them anymore. They do not trust us. They do not believe the paper that we write things on. Okay, that's our government, folks. I don't know when you guys are going to have your agenda thing as to what NSS is going to be working on here. It's not glamorous. It ain't, let's go make pie in the sky plans for Mars. It's dirty fingernails, do it now work, but it's got to be done. We've got to fight this battle. That's one. Number 2, launch quotas. We're beating on the Russians. The Russians, remember the guys who adopted democracy, as opposed to the Chinese guys who didn't, that we're bending over for? Okay? The guys who adopted democracy, we're beating them over the head for State Department purposes by limiting the number of launches they can fly. Now, I'm all for American companies, but I am more for downward pressure on prices. and the increase in markets, because I believe everybody wins in a fair market. And frankly, I think American companies can do quite well in a fair field. Okay, and then the third thing is the NASA stuff I mentioned, which is, again, if you read up, blazingly obvious. That's what we were up against. And we had a little space station flying now. Well, we split into two parts there, and but we didn't quite yet. I went back to Mr. Anderson. Basically, he was the first rich guy outside the door. Okay, that's really how simple it was. No grand conspiracy, no grand plan. Yes, I had told him you could get a space station, but right, show me, you know. I walked out the door, basically. We got back to the States, and we said, you know, hey, come over with us. So we flew back on the 20th. It was great. We were trying to let them know we were real, and this guy actually did have some money. So we put out the word to the Russians. We told Semenoff, this is how naive we were. We're going to fly over Mr. Anderson's private jet. You know, hey, we got money, right? Semenoff sends back, I've got to flee. Yeah. Reality check. So we got over there, and we took Mr. Anderson. We still haven't found a CEO yet. How are we doing? Getting close, right?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, good. I'll go fast now. Because the rest of it's pretty well in public eye. We got over